would have seen the damage wrought by the Cape Town taxi strike and then the huge animosity between the SA National Taxi Council, Santaco, and the city of Cape Town. The city, as you know, impounding taxis when their drivers break the law. Santaco says it wants every taxi released. The city says it's merely enforcing the law. At the moment, the two sides are not in discussions. They appear to be praying together, but they're not in talks because city officials say that when taxi associations arrived at the last negotiations, they were carrying AK-47s when it's illegal for private individuals to own those firearms. Andre Vlok is a conflict and employment dispute specialist. Andre, good afternoon to you. We have different role players here. We have the taxi industry on the one side, we have the city on the other. There are other role players too, the National Transport Minister, the National Police Commissioner, I think, as well. When a conflict, or let me use the word dispute, when a dispute gets so emotional, so difficult, how can it be resolved?
Hello, Stephen. This is certainly an extremely complex conflict, one that, if we step back from the current events on our screens, we have to acknowledge that this has been coming for decades. It's a cyclical conflict. You see these spirals of conflict, the same things happening, and then there are efforts at resolving it, which often are very little more than just, stop the madness for now. It doesn't work. This is not resolution. This is crisis management by stopping it for now. We're seeing these cycles, and you and I will have this discussion a year from now, and 3 years from now, and 10 years from now, unless we start doing things differently.
When, as you make the point that it's cyclical, when that happens, does it mean that the different sides get more and more entrenched and people have old scars from the previous negotiation, often the same individuals involved, Does that make it worse?
Very much. Modern conflict management studies and practice show us a thing called conflict rigidity, and we find it on a personal level. We find it here in a conflict such as the Cape Town taxi conflict, where because our first attempt, you and I have a dispute, because it doesn't work, the second time, whether it's a month or a day or a year later, we carry that baggage into our second and our third and our fourth round, and as this goes on, it becomes more difficult. We distrust each other more. We have less confidence in the process itself, in the people involved, and that is a part of what we see here. Look at how the politicians speak to and of each other. No one, not one of them really believes that there's any resolution, any constructive, creative resolution possible because of the history of the past.
So when this happens, and I mean in a way we see it now, the conflict becomes a bit personalized. It's been striking how one side has been, and I'm talking I suppose about taxi, some politicians from the ANC have been talking about one individual in the city of Cape Town. They've been singling out Councillor J.P. Smith. Now, that might well be a legitimate tactic, but it does mean that things become personalized. You talk about the cycle of violence. So if you were to change the personalities, would that change? If we had a change of leadership at Santaco in the Western Cape, or a change of leadership in certain positions in the city of Cape Town, would that change anything?
Certainly, sometimes people around the table become part of the problem, just their presence, and we don't have to go into whether it's justified or not. Just the perceptions about that person adds to the complexity of the other issues, and then it could certainly be a good conflict strategy to temporarily and correctly remove that person from that conflict discussions. But if we talk about Mr. Smith, for example, it's also, he's not a member of a team. Just this is his position. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would much rather want to see that the people involved, the parties involved, step back from personalizing it to this extent. That is certainly not helpful. And of course, that raises the possibility, a cynical possibility maybe, but how many of the actors involved want resolution? If can we really think in 2023 that a senior politician thinks that they bring solution to a situation like this by insulting an opponent? So there's that which again adds to our original point, how complex this conflict is. There's so many agendas, and of course the people of the Cape, the people who need the taxi services, they're the ones suffering in the midst of all of this complexity and all of these agendas.
I mean, Andre, you talk about does it serve the individuals to actually bring this to an end? Unfortunately, if you look at how our politics works, we're not the only country like this, but ours has particular historical features. People actually gain in the short term, don't they, by stoking things up. They play to their constituency. I think you could probably point that finger at almost everyone involved in this.
A year before elections, how many people want this resolved? If Cape Town, if the city manages to resolve this effectively tomorrow morning, how does that play out in the political landscape of South Africa at this moment? So, it's absolutely responsible. I hope that I'm wrong, and that everyone brings bona fides to this table. But certainly in the last 2 or 3 days, I'm not so sure anymore.
You old cynic, you. When one side refuses to talk to the other, so in the current situation, according to the city of Cape Town at least, the taxi drivers or Santaco arrived with some people carrying AK-47s. They say that it's not legal for a private individual to actually own an AK-47. I've heard some commentary that suggests that security guards can. I'm not sure of the legalities of that. But either way, we now have a situation where one side refuses to talk to the other. How do you get around that? Because nothing's going to change until talks start again. So do you send underlings? Does someone get onto WhatsApp with someone else? Does someone bump into someone else in a church slightly deliberately? How do you get talking again?
There's a pretty long list of things that I disagree with the city on how they're approaching this. But one of the things I really do agree with them on is their, to simplify things, their refusal or their reluctance to negotiate. It's an awful conflict strategy to negotiate in the midst of this instability and uncertainty and some would say anarchy. We've seen those lessons in Africa, in South America, in Eastern Europe, where if you're going to negotiate in the middle of this, where one party can create that instability to their benefit, you're looking at best, you're looking at an unstable sort of an appeasement, compromise, plaster on a gunshot wound type of resolution that will fall apart. So there the city is completely correct in saying no meaningful negotiations until we have a measure of stability. Once that is in place, and that doesn't have to be brought about by strong armed tactics and police with guns. It can be done by simple agreement between the parties. It can be done in 5 minutes from now. Once there's a measure of stability, then of course your question changes. Then of course you have to negotiate and see to it that it gets resolved.
So in your view,
but at this stage, yes, I agree with the city. While Cape Town's burning, it's not a good strategy.
So you can't talk while violence is ongoing.
Yeah, it should be an absolute precondition that brings stability. Do what you can. Stop making these statements from this side. That I was starting to read the measure of progress in what was going on. And in comes the minister telling them, just starting the process all over again, solidifying the conflict, confusing it, adding to the complexity. All of that has got to stop. The violence has got to stop largely. And then in that environment, now we need to negotiate. Now we need to be constructive. Now we need to be creative. And now we need to fix this. But while this is going on, I see there are efforts at talks, and there's nothing wrong with that, but meaningful negotiations against a backdrop like this, it's doomed to failure.
We've seen other moments in other places involving the taxi industry where there have been successful negotiations, and I remember quite clearly for various reasons many years ago the introduction of rear-via buses in Joburg. There have been similar systems in other places that required quite difficult negotiations. I think Charles Newpen was heavily involved in those. He often is somehow. Is there a kind of blueprint to do it? Is there a way that you can actually achieve a longer-term peace in situations like this?
I think the Joburg-Rio Bay one is distinguishable on quite a few levels. Cape Town is this very specific conflict backdrop. You know, some of the boxes are the same. Some of them are really very different. The history of this conflict, the history of the region, the perceptions of the political power, the negotiating power, the conflict power, are different. You know, if there was a template that we could take from Joburg to Cape Town and it would work, it would be done by now. It's not. I think people like your mayor or the Cape Town mayor, I think Ricardo McKenzie, they're doing good work. There's just some of the pieces of the puzzle still missing.
And to chair these negotiations, I mean, I don't know who does that, Andre. You've probably done similar things like that. How difficult is that? What kind of individual do you need there? Someone who can hold their breath and count to 10, I'd suspect.
No. Modern conflict management does away with all of that. I often surprise people with not being a calm and peaceful, nice person. Conflict is there to be resolved, not to be papered over. And I think that has been a large part of the problem in the Cape Town conflicts. You know, there's this, because Cape Town's burning, we have to be nice, we have to say the right thing. And that has led, maybe unintentionally, to none of these conflicts ever really being resolved. We don't get all the pieces on the table. We don't call a spade a spade. We don't deal with the real structural problem, you know, the spatial problems. We don't deal with the background. We don't deal with a ton of unresolved conflicts that has to feature as a part of this. We simplify the Cape Town taxi problem as a binary thing, as a 2-3 party issue with 2 or 3 boxes to approach and fix. And that is why we never get to proper transcending resolution. And the people who need to bring them there are the people they have at the moment. You shouldn't have conditions. You shouldn't send the nice guys to this type of table. You should face the situation as it is. You should deal with the situation as it would be the day after the negotiations. Not wear a nice suit and go in there and say the nice things. That's why these things fall apart. You have to put together a resolution that will work once we return to work, once we start irritating each other, once the taxi payments are due, once the guy earns 200 Rand a day, all of those things, once that starts kicking in, that's your resolution that you're looking for.
Andre Vlok, thank you very much indeed. A conflict and employment dispute specialist. Really do appreciate the time and the thoughts on that. Well, some interesting views on the situation that we see in Cape Town. In other news,